The day my grandfather died, everyone cried. But not because he was rich, not because he left behind a large estate, and certainly not because he had been famous. People cried because, somehow, George Carter had spent 83 years making everyone around him feel safe. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice, never complained, never asked for anything in return. To me, he wasn't just my grandfather. He was my best friend. Every Saturday morning since I was 7 years old, I would ride my bike to his old farmhouse just outside Willow Creek. He always had fresh coffee waiting for himself and hot chocolate waiting for me. We spent hours fixing broken radios, polishing old watches, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He used to tell me, "Every object has a story, Ethan. Most people only see what's on the surface." At the time, I thought he was talking about antiques. Years later, I realized he had been talking about people. The funeral was quiet, exactly the way he would have wanted. Family members hugged one another. Old neighbors shared stories. Children ran through the churchyard without understanding why the adults looked so sad. I stood beside the casket until everyone else had left. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. As I placed my hand on the polished wood, I whispered, "I'll miss you, Grandpa." A gentle hand touched my shoulder. It was Mr. Harrison, my grandfather's lawyer. "Ethan," he said softly, "your grandfather left something specifically for you." He handed me a small envelope. Unlike the others, it wasn't sealed with wax. There was only my name written across the front, in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. "For Ethan, only when you're ready." I opened it immediately. Inside was a single sentence. "Meet me one last time. Home." There was also something else. A small iron key. Old, rust-covered, heavy, unlike any key I had ever seen. No explanation. No address. No signature. Just the key. "What does this open?" I asked. Mr. Harrison smiled sadly. "I honestly don't know. It's all he gave me. He only said one thing." "What?" "When Ethan is ready, he'll know." That night I couldn't sleep. The key sat on my bedside table. Every time I looked at it, I felt something strange, almost as if it belonged to a story that had been waiting decades to be told. The next morning, I drove to my grandfather's farmhouse. It had been empty since he moved into assisted living 3 years earlier. The gravel driveway was covered with fallen leaves. The porch creaked beneath my feet exactly as I remembered. Everything looked frozen in time. The rocking chair, the wind chimes, the faded blue front door. Inside, dust covered every piece of furniture. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, illuminating tiny particles drifting through the air. It felt as though my grandfather had simply stepped outside and would return at any moment carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. I walked slowly through every room. Nothing seemed unusual. No hidden doors. No mysterious locks. No clues. After nearly an hour, frustration began replacing curiosity. Maybe the key meant nothing. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe. As I turned to leave, something caught my attention. The old grandfather clock in the hallway. It had stopped years ago. 3:17 分. The exact same time I remembered seeing as a child. Back then I had asked Grandpa why he never repaired it. He simply smiled. Some things stop for a reason. Now those words echoed in my mind. I knelt beside the clock. For the first time in my life, I noticed tiny scratches near the wooden base, as if someone had moved it countless times. Heart pounding, I grabbed both sides. The clock was heavier than I expected, but slowly, it shifted, just enough. Behind it, hidden in the wall, was a narrow iron door, barely visible beneath decades of dust. At its center, a single ancient keyhole, exactly the same shape as the rusty key resting in my pocket. I stared at it, unable to breathe, unable to move. Then, with trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and lifted the key. For several seconds, I simply stared at the lock. The rusty key felt unusually heavy in my hand. It was almost as though my grandfather had somehow known this exact moment would come. Every instinct told me to stop. Whatever was behind that door had remained hidden for decades. Maybe it was meant to stay that way. But another voice inside me whispered something else. "You didn't come here to walk away." I slowly inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. A loud metallic click echoed through the empty hallway. The sound made my heart race. I pulled gently on the small iron handle. At first, nothing happened. The wood around the frame had swollen with age. Dust crumbled from the edges as I pulled harder. Finally, the door opened. A wave of cold air drifted toward me. It carried the scent of old paper, cedar wood, and time itself. I switched on my phone's flashlight. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness below. 20 steps, maybe more. I hesitated. The farmhouse had been built nearly 70 years ago. I had spent my entire childhood here, yet I had never known this room existed. Grandpa had hidden it perfectly. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. Each wooden stair creaked beneath my weight. The deeper I descended, the colder the air became. When I reached the bottom, my flashlight revealed a surprisingly large room. It wasn't a basement. It was a study, a secret study. Bookshelves covered every wall. Hundreds of books stood neatly arranged. There were old maps, antique clocks, framed photographs, and shelves filled with carefully labeled boxes. Nothing looked abandoned. Everything had been organized with extraordinary care, as if Grandpa had expected someone to visit. On the center desk sat a single envelope. Unlike the others upstairs, this one had my name written across it. Ethan. Nothing more. I slowly opened it. Inside was another handwritten note. If you found this room, you've already proven something. You chose curiosity over fear. Good. Everything you see here exists because one promise changed my entire life. Before you learn that promise, you must first understand the woman in the photograph. The woman? I looked around the room. Immediately, my eyes landed on a large black and white photograph resting in a silver frame. She couldn't have been older than 30. Dark hair, gentle smile, kind eyes. She looked strangely familiar, yet I had never seen her before. At least, I didn't think I had. I picked up the frame. On the back, someone had written, the 12th of June, 1974. Never forgotten. No name, no explanation, just those two words. Never forgotten. Who are you? I whispered. Suddenly, another detail caught my attention. Around the room hung dozens of family photographs, pictures I had seen many times before. Grandpa, Grandma, my father as a child, Christmas mornings, fishing trips, birthday parties. But something felt wrong. I walked closer. Every photograph had been altered. Tiny sections had been carefully cut away. Someone had been removed. The missing spaces were subtle. An empty shoulder beside Grandpa, a hand resting on someone's back, a shadow where another person should have stood. Once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Someone had existed in every important family memory. Someone my family had deliberately erased. A chill ran through my body. I hurried back to the desk. Inside the first drawer lay dozens of old letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The oldest letter was dated August 3. The handwriting wasn't my grandfather's. It belonged to the mysterious woman. My hands trembled as I unfolded the first page. The opening sentence stopped me cold. George, if Ethan ever finds these letters, it means we failed to tell him the truth ourselves. I froze. My name, written almost 30 years before I was born. That was impossible. I checked the date again. I wasn't born until 2003. How could this woman know my name? Had someone written the date incorrectly? Or had Grandpa added my name later? Nothing made sense. As I searched the desk for answers, I noticed a leather journal tucked beneath several folders. Its cover was badly worn. The corners had softened with age. Across the front, embossed in faded gold letters, were 6 simple words. The promise I could never break. I slowly opened the journal. The first page contained only one sentence. Everything they believe about our family is a lie. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. For my entire life, I believed I knew my family's history. Now, in less than 15 minutes, that certainty had completely disappeared. I looked once more at the smiling woman in the photograph. Who was she? Why had every picture been altered to erase her existence? Why did she know my name decades before I was born? And what promise had my grandfather protected for nearly 50 years? With trembling hands, I turned the page of the journal, and the first chapter began with a date that would change everything. September 18, 1974. I slowly turned the page. The paper was yellow with age. The edges were worn from years of being handled. My grandfather's handwriting filled every line. Neat, careful, almost painfully precise. At the top of the first page was a single date. September 18, 1974. Exactly 50 years ago. I took a deep breath and began reading. I never believed a single decision could change the rest of a man's life. Until today. If anyone is reading this, I hope you never have to make the choice I made. Because no matter what I chose, someone was going to lose everything. I frowned. What choice? The next few pages described my grandfather as a young man, 29 years old, working as a carpenter, recently married, saving every dollar to build the farmhouse I had loved since childhood. Life sounded simple, ordinary, until one rainy evening. I was driving home when I saw a car overturned beside Miller Bridge. No other vehicles, no police, no ambulance, only silence. I climbed down the embankment. The driver was already gone, but in the back seat, I found a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 4. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She simply looked at me and asked, "Is my mommy sleeping?" I stopped reading. A lump formed in my throat. The image was heartbreaking. I turned the page. The woman in the front seat never woke up. Neither did the man beside her. I carried the little girl through the rain until the ambulance arrived. Her name was Anna. She had no other family. No grandparents. No uncles. No one. For weeks, I visited her at the children's home. At first, I told myself I was only checking to see if she was all right. But the truth was, I had already started thinking of her as family. I looked toward the framed photograph on the desk. The woman, dark hair, gentle smile. Was that little girl Anna? I picked up the frame again. This time I noticed something I had missed. Around her neck hung a tiny silver locket, exactly like the one my grandmother always wore. Except, Grandma's locket had disappeared years ago. I remembered asking about it when I was a child. She smiled sadly. I gave it to someone who needed it more. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, everything seemed connected. I returned to the journal. Your grandmother loved Anna immediately. So did I. But adoption wasn't easy. The paperwork lasted almost a year. Eventually, she became our daughter. Officially, legally, completely. She was no different from any child born into our family. She was ours, and we were hers. I blinked several times. Daughter? My father had always told me he was Grandpa's only child. He never mentioned a sister. Not once. I quickly searched the family photographs again. This time I understood what I was looking for. The missing figure, the empty spaces. Every photograph had once included a little girl. Someone had carefully removed her. Every single time. Why? My pulse quickened. The answer had to be somewhere in the journal. I continued reading. Anna was the greatest blessing we never expected. She filled our home with laughter. She called us Mom and Dad before the adoption papers were even finished. For 12 wonderful years. Life was perfect. Then Richard came. Richard. The name appeared alone on the page. No last name. No explanation. Yet my grandfather had pressed the pen so hard that it nearly tore the paper. I had never heard that name before, but somehow, it frightened me. The following pages describe strange events. A man watching the farmhouse from across the road. Anonymous phone calls late at night. Letters with no return address. Doors left open. Windows unlocked. Nothing stolen. Nothing damaged. Only one unmistakable message. Someone was watching. Then I reached an entry dated the 3rd of April, 1987. The handwriting became uneven, shaking, almost unreadable. Richard knows. After all these years, he finally found Anna. I stared at the sentence. Found her? Found her from where? Why had she been hiding? Who exactly was Richard? Then I turned another page, only to find it completely blank. The next page, blank. The next, blank again. Nearly 30 pages had been torn out, cleanly, deliberately. Someone hadn't simply removed a few notes. Someone had erased an entire chapter of my grandfather's life. A chapter he wanted no one to read. Or perhaps, a chapter someone else didn't want anyone to find. Frustrated, I closed the journal. Something slid from between its pages and landed softly on the wooden floor. A folded newspaper clipping. I picked it up. The headline was faded but still readable. Local teen girl disappears without a trace. My eyes moved to the photograph beneath the headline. The girl looked familiar, very familiar. Dark hair, gentle smile, the same silver locket. It was Anna, the woman from the photograph, the girl my grandparents had adopted. According to the newspaper, she vanished at the age of 16, 40 years ago, without leaving a single clue. Without saying goodbye, I slowly turned the clipping over. Written across the back, in my grandfather's handwriting, were 7 words. She didn't disappear. She sacrificed everything to protect us. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. This wasn't the story of a missing girl. It was the story of someone who had chosen to vanish. But why? And protect my family. From whom? Just then, a loud creak echoed from upstairs. I looked toward the staircase. Someone was walking across the old farmhouse floor. I held my breath. I had locked the front door. I was supposed to be alone. Slowly, very slowly, another footstep echoed through the silent house. Then another, whoever it was. They were coming downstairs. I didn't move. The old staircase creaked again. One step, then another. Whoever was upstairs wasn't trying to be quiet. They were walking slowly, deliberately, as if they already knew exactly where I was. My pulse pounded inside my ears. I looked around the hidden room for something I could use to defend myself. The only thing within reach was an old brass candle holder sitting on the desk. I grabbed it. The metal felt cold in my hand. Another step echoed above me. Then silence. Complete silence. For several seconds, I heard nothing except my own breathing. Finally, I forced myself toward the staircase. Every instinct told me to stay hidden, but another thought kept repeating itself. This was my grandfather's house. Whoever had entered wasn't supposed to be here. Slowly, I climbed the stairs. Each wooden step groaned beneath my weight. As I reached the top, the farmhouse seemed strangely calm. Sunlight still filtered through the dusty windows. Nothing appeared disturbed. I walked into the hallway. Hello? No answer. Only silence. I checked the kitchen. Empty. The living room. Empty. Then I noticed something strange. The front door stood slightly open. I was certain I had locked it. A cool breeze drifted inside, gently moving the old curtains. Someone had definitely been here. But why leave without taking anything? I turned back toward the hallway. That was when I saw it. A plain white envelope lying on the floor. It hadn't been there earlier. My name was written across the front. Ethan. My stomach tightened. I picked it up. The paper felt new. Far newer than anything else inside the farmhouse. Someone had placed it there only moments ago. Inside was a single handwritten note. Stop looking. Some promises were never meant to be broken. No signature. No explanation. Only those 8 words. A chill ran through my body. Someone knew I had opened the hidden room. Someone knew exactly what I was searching for, and they wanted me to stop. Instead, their warning only made me more determined. That afternoon, I drove into town. There was only one person left who might know something. Margaret Wilson. She had been my grandfather's next-door neighbor for almost 50 years. If anyone remembered Anna, it would be her. Margaret answered the door wearing a thick gray sweater despite the warm weather. She smiled when she saw me. Ethan, you've grown into your grandfather's eyes. We sat together on her porch. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. The funeral, the weather, the old farmhouse. Then I took the newspaper clipping from my pocket. The moment Margaret saw Anna's photograph, her smile disappeared. She became completely still. I knew her, she whispered. I leaned forward. You knew Anna? Margaret nodded slowly. She was like a granddaughter to me. What happened to her? For nearly a minute, she said nothing. Her eyes never left the photograph. Finally, she looked at me. That's not the question you should be asking. Confused, I frowned. What do you mean? She folded her hands together. The real question is, why does everyone believe she disappeared? The words hit me like a punch. You mean she didn't? Margaret shook her head. No. My heart skipped a beat. Then where did she go? Margaret looked toward the road, as though checking to make sure nobody was listening. Then she lowered her voice. She left on purpose. I stared at her. Why? To save your family. The exact words my grandfather had written. I could hardly believe it. Save them from who? Margaret hesitated. Then she quietly answered. Her father. I felt my stomach tighten. My grandfather adopted her. Yes. So who was her father? Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. When Anna was a little girl, her father was arrested for fraud. He disappeared before the trial. No one ever found him. I frowned. So why would she be afraid of him? Margaret's expression darkened. Because he escaped. The porch suddenly felt colder. He spent years searching for Anna. When he finally learned George had adopted her, he came back. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to move into place. The strange phone calls, the man watching the farmhouse, the torn pages, the missing photographs. Everything pointed toward one person, Anna's biological father, Richard, I whispered. Margaret looked directly into my eyes. You know his name. It wasn't a question. I slowly nodded. She sighed. I was afraid of that. Before I could ask another question, Margaret stood and walked inside her house. She returned, carrying a small wooden box. Its surface was worn smooth with age. This belonged to your grandfather. He asked me to keep it until the day someone came asking about Anna. She placed it gently in my hands. It belongs to you now. The box wasn't locked. Inside rested a silver locket, the same one Anna wore in every photograph. Beneath it lay an old cassette tape, and one final note, written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. If you're holding this, Richard has learned the truth. My heart began racing again. I looked up immediately. Margaret. But she was no longer looking at me. She was staring past my shoulder. Her face had turned completely white. Ethan. Her voice barely escaped her lips. Don't turn around. Every muscle in my body locked. Slowly, very slowly, I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. Then a man's voice. Old, calm, uncomfortably familiar. I've been waiting a very long time for someone to open that room. I didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The man's footsteps stopped only a few feet behind me. Margaret's face had gone completely pale. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at him, with fear. Real fear. The kind that doesn't disappear with age. Slowly, I turned. An elderly man stood at the edge of the porch. He was probably in his late 70s. Tall, thin, wearing a dark wool coat despite the warm afternoon. His silver hair was neatly combed back. His posture was straight, too straight for someone his age. He looked less like a stranger, and more like someone who had spent his entire life making people uncomfortable. His eyes settled on the wooden box in my hands. Then he smiled, not warmly, not kindly, just enough to make me uneasy. So, you found George's little hiding place. I tightened my grip on the box. Who are you? Instead of answering, he looked toward Margaret. You should have burned it. Margaret's voice shook. You promised you would never come back. I lead. The man looked at me again. My name is Richard Bennett. The name struck me immediately. Richard. The same name from Grandpa's journal. The same man who had been searching for Anna. My pulse quickened. You knew my grandfather. Richard gave a slow nod. For nearly 50 years. Were you Anna's father? For the first time, his smile disappeared. No. The answer caught me completely off guard. No, I was her uncle. I frowned. Then why were you looking for her? Richard looked out across the empty road before answering. Because I was trying to save her. Everything inside me stopped. Save her? That wasn't possible. Grandpa's journal painted Richard as the villain. But villains don't usually describe themselves that way. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything. His voice remained calm. I'm simply tired of lies. He looked directly into my eyes. George told you I hunted Anna. Yes. Did he tell you why? Silence. I couldn't answer. Because he hadn't. Richard nodded slowly. I didn't think so. He reached into his coat pocket. Every muscle in my body tensed. Instead of a weapon, he pulled out an old photograph. Carefully, he handed it to me. I looked down. It showed Anna, maybe 15 years old, standing beside Richard. Both smiling. She had one arm wrapped around him. The photograph didn't look forced. It didn't look frightened. It looked happy. I stared at it in disbelief. This can't be real. It is. Margaret suddenly stood. Stop it. Richard. Enough. Richard sighed. No, Margaret. It's been 50 years. The boy deserves to know. The boy, he still saw me as a child. Even though I was 23, he continued. George wasn't protecting Anna from me. He was protecting someone else. The words landed like a hammer. What do you mean? Richard pointed toward the silver locket inside the wooden box. Open it. I looked at Margaret. She slowly shook her head, almost pleading. Don't. Richard's voice became firmer. Open it. After several seconds of hesitation, I picked up the locket. It felt surprisingly heavy. There was a tiny latch on the side. I pressed it gently. Click. The locket opened. Inside were 2 miniature photographs. One was Anna as a little girl. The other made my blood run cold. It was my grandfather, much younger, standing beside Anna, his arm around her shoulders. But it wasn't the photograph itself that shocked me. It was the inscription beneath it. George Carter, my father. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Father? That couldn't be right. Grandpa had adopted Anna. He wasn't her biological father. He couldn't be. I looked up at Richard. What is this? Richard's expression softened. The biggest lie George ever told. I shook my head. No. Yes. He took a slow breath. Anna was never adopted. The words echoed in my ears. She was George's biological daughter. My heart pounded so violently I could barely hear anything else. Richard continued quietly. The adoption story was invented to protect her. Nothing made sense anymore. Every truth I thought I'd uncovered collapsed in an instant. The hidden room, the journal, the photographs, the missing records. Had Grandpa lied to everyone? Oh, had he lied to protect someone? Richard looked toward the old farmhouse in the distance, then back at me. George made one decision in 1974, one impossible decision, and that choice changed every generation of your family. He stepped closer, lowered his voice, and Ethan, his eyes met mine. You're only alive today because he chose to lie. The words sent a chill through my entire body, because for the first time, this wasn't just my grandfather's story anymore. It was mine, and somewhere, inside the hidden room, the torn pages of the journal were waiting. Pages that, according to Richard, didn't disappear by accident. Someone had taken them, someone who was still alive, and someone who would do anything to make sure I never found them. I couldn't speak. The silver locket rested in my trembling hands. Inside it, a tiny photograph, and beneath it, 2 words that shattered everything I believed. My father. I looked at Richard, then at Margaret. Neither of them said a word. It was Margaret who finally broke the silence. Richard, that's enough. He slowly shook his head. No, it's already too late for half-truths. He turned back to me. George wasn't a bad man. He was the best man I've ever known. But even good men make impossible choices. I stared at him. Then tell me, what really happened? Richard took a long breath. Not here. He glanced toward the road. For the first time, I noticed a dark SUV parked nearly 200 yards away. The engine wasn't running, but someone was inside, watching us. Richard's expression immediately changed. We have to leave. My pulse quickened. Who are they? They've been following me for 3 days. What? They're looking for the journal. Every instinct told me he was serious. Margaret quickly stepped inside and locked her front door. Take the back road, she whispered. They'll expect you to use the highway. Before I could ask another question, Richard handed me a folded piece of paper. Meet me at the old mill. 1 hour. If I don't arrive, his eyes settled on mine. Burn everything. Without another word, he walked toward his pickup truck. Within seconds, he was gone. The SUV remained where it was, still, watching. I drove back to Grandpa's farmhouse as fast as I could. The entire way, one question echoed inside my head. Who wanted the journal? Inside the hidden room, I placed the leather journal on the desk once again. 30 pages had been torn out. Someone had removed them with incredible care. Not ripped, cut, deliberately. I slowly examined the spine. Then I noticed something unusual. Tiny threads, almost invisible. Grandpa had repaired the journal once before. Carefully, very carefully. Which meant he had known those pages were missing. Maybe even expected someone to find them. I turned the journal upside down. A small folded note slipped from inside the binding. Across the front were 4 words. Look beneath the shelf. I immediately searched the room. Every bookshelf, every cabinet, every drawer. Finally, beneath the lowest shelf, my fingers touched something loose. A wooden panel. I carefully lifted it. Hidden underneath was a flat metal box, smaller than a briefcase, completely covered in dust. Inside were the missing pages, every single one, perfectly preserved. Grandpa hadn't lost them, he had hidden them. I unfolded the first page. At the top was another date, the 11th of October, 1987. The handwriting looked rushed, more emotional than anything I had read before. If you're reading these pages, then Richard finally decided to tell the truth. Good. He deserves to, because I never could. There is something no one knows. Not even Anna, especially not Anna. I frowned. Not even Anna. I continued. I lied about the adoption. Not because she wasn't my daughter, because she was. I became Anna's father the day I carried her from that wrecked car. Blood creates life. Love creates family. From that day forward, she was my daughter. Nothing else mattered. I stopped reading. Richard had been right. Grandpa hadn't lied to deceive me. He had lied to protect Anna, to make sure no one could ever separate them. My eyes returned to the page. Richard wasn't searching for Anna to hurt her. He wanted custody after his brother disappeared. Legally, he had every right. Morally, I couldn't allow it. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I erased every record connecting Anna to her past. The adoption never happened, because there was never an adoption. Only a new birth, a new family, a new beginning. I broke the law, but I'd do it again. Every single time. Tears filled my eyes. For the first time, I understood my grandfather completely. He hadn't stolen a child. He had saved one. Then the final page caught my attention. Unlike the others, it wasn't about Anna. It was about me, Ethan. If you've reached this page, then you've already learned enough to question everything. Now I need you to question one more thing. Your father has never told you why he stopped speaking to me for almost 5 years. It wasn't because of money. It wasn't because of family. It was because of you. I felt my stomach tighten. Me? I had never known my father and grandpa stop speaking. Dad always said they were close. The journal continued. There is something about the day you were born. Something your father never had the courage to tell you. And if I'm gone before you learn the truth, you'll find the answer where every Carter has always found hope, under the old oak tree. At sunrise, one last time. The page ended there. No explanation, only another clue. I closed the journal slowly. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to set, which meant sunrise was less than 12 hours away. I looked toward the ancient oak tree standing alone behind the farmhouse. The same tree Grandpa and I had climbed together every summer. The same tree where he taught me to carve my initials into the bark. The same tree where he always said, the strongest roots are the ones no one can see. Back then, I thought he was talking about trees. Now, I wasn't so sure. And somehow, I knew that when the sun rose tomorrow morning, the final secret my grandfather had protected for 50 years would finally come to light. I barely slept that night. Grandpa's journal lay open on the kitchen table. His final words echoed in my mind. You'll find the answer where every Carter has always found hope, under the old oak tree. At 5:12 a.m., I stepped outside. The morning air was cool. Mist drifted across the empty fields behind the farmhouse. In the distance, the old oak tree stood exactly where it always had. Massive, silent, unmoving. For as long as I could remember, Grandpa had called it the heart of the farm. As a child, I thought he was joking. Now I wasn't so sure. I walked slowly across the damp grass. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the tree, sunlight was just beginning to rise above the horizon. Golden light spilled through the branches. Then I noticed something unusual. Near the roots, the soil looked different. Not freshly disturbed, but slightly lower than the surrounding ground. Almost as if it had settled over many years. I knelt down. My fingers brushed against a flat piece of stone hidden beneath fallen leaves. There were no words carved into it, only a tiny symbol. A-K, the same shape as the rusty key Grandpa had left me. I swallowed hard. He had planned every step, even this. I hurried back to the shed and found an old shovel. Within minutes, I was digging. The soil was soft, almost too soft. About 2 feet down, the shovel struck something solid. Glum. Mateo. My heart began racing. Carefully, I cleared away the remaining dirt. A weatherproof steel case emerged from the ground. Rust covered the edges, but the lock was intact. To my surprise, the rusty key fit perfectly. The lid opened with a deep metallic groan. Inside were 3 items: a sealed envelope, an old VHS tape, and a faded birth certificate. My eyes immediately locked onto the certificate. The name at the top made my breath catch. Ethan Carter. My birth certificate. Why would Grandpa bury my birth certificate beneath a tree? I unfolded it. Then I froze. The father's name was blank. Completely blank. No signature. No record. Nothing. I checked it again. Surely I had missed something. But I hadn't. The official document listed only one parent. My mother. I felt the world spin around me. My entire life, I believed my father had signed that document. Yet, according to this, legally, he never had. Before I could process what it meant, I opened the envelope. Inside was Grandpa's final letter. Dear Ethan, if you've found this box, then you've learned enough to understand why I couldn't tell you everything while I was alive. Some truths don't protect people. They destroy them. I hoped you would never need to know this one. But hope is not the same as choice. Your father loved you from the first moment he held you. Never doubt that. Not for 1 second. But love and truth are not always the same thing. The man who raised you chose to become your father long before any court or document could recognize him. Remember that when you read the next page. My hands trembled. There was another folded sheet beneath the letter. I unfolded it slowly. One sentence that changed everything. The man who raised you is not your biological father. The words blurred before my eyes. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every memory of my childhood rushed through my mind. Dad teaching me to ride a bicycle. Dad cheering at my school games. Dad staying awake beside my hospital bed when I broke my arm. None of those moments felt false. Yet suddenly, every one of them carried a new meaning. He had chosen me, not because he had to, because he wanted to. A tear rolled down my cheek before I even realized I was crying. Then I reached for the final item in the steel case, the VHS tape. Across the label, written in Grandpa's careful handwriting, were 6 words: for Ethan. Watch this alone. I stared at it for a long time. Somewhere on that tape was the last piece of the puzzle. The truth about my father, the truth about my family, and perhaps the truth about who I really was. I slipped the tape into my backpack, then looked back at the old oak tree. The morning sun had climbed above the fields. Birds sang from the highest branches. For the first time since opening the hidden room, I understood why Grandpa had buried the box here. The strongest roots really were the ones no one could see, and mine had just been uncovered. I drove home in complete silence. The steel case rested on the passenger seat beside me, but my eyes kept drifting toward one thing: the VHS tape. For Ethan. Watch this alone. I hadn't touched a VHS player in years. Most people my age had never even used one. Yet somehow, Grandpa had known I would find a way. Back in my apartment, I searched through the storage closet. Hidden behind several dusty boxes was an old VCR my father refused to throw away. I remembered asking him once why he kept it. He smiled and simply said, "Some memories don't work on modern machines." At the time, I laughed. Now those words felt very different. I connected the VCR to an old television in the spare bedroom. The screen flickered to life. Blue. Silent. My hands trembled as I inserted the tape. The machine clicked. The screen filled with static. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, a familiar face appeared. Grandpa. He looked much younger, maybe 60 years old. Healthier. Stronger. He smiled gently into the camera. "Hello, Ethan." The sound of his voice hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, it felt like he was alive again. "If you're watching this, then I didn't live long enough to tell you everything myself." He paused. "I suppose that means you're probably angry." He smiled sadly. "You have every right to be." I felt my throat tighten. Grandpa looked directly into the camera. "I've asked you to solve this mystery one step at a time because the truth is too heavy to carry all at once." He reached for something outside the frame. When he lifted it into view, I froze. It was my baby blanket, the small blue blanket my mother had kept in a memory box for years. I recognized the tiny embroidered star in the corner immediately. Grandpa gently folded it across his lap. "Your mother asked me to keep this. She believed one day you would understand why." He took a slow breath. "The night you were born, your father wasn't there." I felt my heart pound. Dad always told me he arrived at the hospital minutes after I was born. Had that been another lie? Grandpa continued. "He wanted to be, but he couldn't. There had been an accident. A photograph appeared on the screen. A badly damaged pickup truck. Emergency lights. Rain. Darkness." My stomach tightened. "Your father was driving to the hospital when another vehicle crossed the center line. He survived, but he nearly died." I stared silently. No one had ever told me this story. Not once. "By the time he arrived, you were already in your mother's arms." Grandpa smiled softly. He cried before he even spoke. "Is he okay? Is Emily okay?" Those were the first words he asked. Not about himself. About the two of you. A tear rolled down my cheek. That sounded exactly like my dad. Grandpa leaned closer to the camera. "Being a father isn't about being first. It's about staying." I closed my eyes for a moment. Those words settled deep inside me. Then Grandpa's expression changed. More serious. More cautious. "There is one thing I have never told anyone." My pulse quickened. "Not Richard. No, Margaret. Not even your father." I leaned toward the screen. Grandpa reached into his shirt pocket. Slowly, he removed a small photograph. It showed a young woman holding a newborn baby. My mother, and me. Standing beside her was a man I had never seen before. Tall, dark-haired, smiling proudly at the camera. Grandpa looked directly into the lens. "This is your biological father." Everything inside me stopped. The room seemed to spin. Grandpa continued speaking. "The reason your father never signed your birth certificate was because he wasn't given the chance. He met you only hours after this photograph was taken." I couldn't breathe. The man who raised me had known from the beginning, known I wasn't his biological son, and still, he stayed. Grandpa looked down for several seconds before speaking again. "The man in the photograph died 3 days after you were born." I stared at the television, unable to process the words. "He was a firefighter. He died rescuing 2 children from a warehouse fire." The room fell silent. Grandpa wiped a tear from his own eye. "Your mother was broken. She believed she could never love again. Then your father made a promise." The screen switched to another photograph. Dad, standing beside my mother's hospital bed, holding me in his arms, smiling through tears. Grandpa's voice became quiet. He looked at me and said, "He may not carry my name by blood, but if she'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life earning the right to be called his father." I covered my mouth. The tears came without warning. Every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee, every Christmas morning. He had never treated me differently. Not once. Not because he had to, because he chose to. Grandpa looked into the camera one final time. "Ethan, if this tape has taught you anything, I hope it's this. Families are not built by blood. They're built by promises that people keep." He smiled, the same gentle smile I had known since childhood. "Now, there's only one person left who can finish this story." The image flickered. Then the screen faded to black. A single line of white text appeared. "Go home. Your father has been waiting." I sat frozen in front of the television. The tape had ended, but somehow, the journey wasn't over. For the first time in my life, I understood that the greatest secret my grandfather protected wasn't about Anna, or Richard, or the hidden room. It was about the quiet, ordinary man I had called Dad. And now, it was finally time to hear his side of the story. I didn't call my father. I didn't text him. I simply got into my car and drove home. For nearly 2 hours, I replayed Grandpa's final words over and over. "Your father has been waiting." Waiting for what? Waiting for me to discover the truth, or waiting for the courage to finally tell it himself. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the sun was setting. The porch light was already on. Dad was sitting alone on the front steps. 2 mugs of coffee rested beside him, just like Grandpa used to do. He looked up as I got out of the car. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "I was wondering how long it would take." I froze. You knew? He nodded. I knew the day your grandfather gave me the key. I sat beside him. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It felt heavy, like two people were carrying the same secret from opposite ends. Finally, I reached into my backpack and placed the birth certificate on the porch between us. Dad looked down at it, then slowly closed his eyes. I always hoped you'd never have to see that. I looked at him. Why didn't you tell me? He smiled sadly. Because I was afraid. You? He laughed softly. Parents get scared too. I thought if you knew, you might stop calling me Dad. The words hit harder than anything else I'd heard. I stared at the man who had raised me, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who sat through every school concert, who worked overtime so I could go to college, the man who never missed a birthday, never missed a baseball game, never stopped showing up. You really believe that? His eyes filled with tears. I loved you from the first day I held you, but love has a strange way of making people fear losing everything. He reached into his wallet. Carefully, he unfolded an old photograph. It was the same one from Grandpa's VHS tape. My mother, me, and the firefighter. My name was never supposed to be part of this picture, Dad whispered. He was my best friend. I looked up in surprise. What? Dad nodded. His name was Michael. We became firefighters together. We were supposed to grow old together. His voice trembled, but life had other plans. He looked toward the fading sunset, the day he died. I promised him something. I leaned closer. He asked me to look after your mother if anything ever happened. Dad smiled through tears. I told him not to be ridiculous. We were 25. We thought we had forever. He looked back at me. 3 days later, I was standing beside his coffin. The evening grew quiet. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Dad continued. Months passed. Your mother could barely leave the house. She wasn't looking for another husband, and I wasn't trying to replace my best friend. We were just two broken people, trying to survive. He took a deep breath. Then one afternoon, you laughed. I frowned. I was only a baby. I know, but it changed everything. He smiled. You reached up, grabbed my finger, and refused to let go. A tear rolled down his cheek. I realized at that moment, I already loved you. Not because of blood, not because of obligation, because somewhere along the way, you had become my son. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since opening Grandpa's hidden room. Why didn't you ever adopt me officially? Dad looked down. I tried. Twice. What happened? Your mother couldn't bear changing your birth certificate. She said Michael gave you your life, and I gave you your future. So we left it exactly as it was. I stared at the document lying between us. For years, I thought that blank space beside father meant something was missing. Now I understood. Nothing had ever been missing. Love had filled every empty space. Dad stood and walked toward the garage. A minute later, he returned carrying an old wooden toolbox. I recognized it immediately. Grandpa's favorite toolbox. He placed it in my lap. I think he wanted you to have this too. Inside were Grandpa's watch, his favorite carpenter's pencil, and one final envelope. Across the front, in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For my family." I opened it carefully. Inside was one final letter. If you're all together while reading this, then I got my wish. People spend their lives chasing money, success, fame. I chased something much simpler, a family that would never have to hide from the truth again. If you've reached this moment, then every secret, every sacrifice, every impossible decision was worth it, because love isn't measured by the people we lose. It's measured by the people who choose to stay, take care of one another, tell the truth, forgive quickly, and whenever life becomes difficult, sit on the porch, share a cup of coffee, watch the sunset. You'll be surprised how many problems become smaller when they're shared. Love always. Grandpa. None of us spoke. Mom had quietly stepped onto the porch while I was reading. She wrapped one arm around Dad, the other around me. For the first time, I understood what Grandpa had been trying to teach me all those years. Every object really does have a story. The rusty key had never been about a hidden room. The hidden room had never been about old journals. The journals had never been about secrets. They were all leading me toward one simple truth. A father is not the man whose name appears on a piece of paper. A father is the man who stays, the man who sacrifices, the man who keeps his promises. The next morning, we returned to Grandpa's farmhouse together. Dad, Mom, and me. We stood beneath the old oak tree as the first rays of sunlight broke across the fields. Without saying a word, Dad slipped Grandpa's rusty key into my hand. "It's yours now." I looked at the farmhouse one last time, then I smiled. The greatest inheritance Grandpa had left behind wasn't hidden beneath the floor or buried under a tree. It wasn't the journals, the letters, or even the key. It was the reminder that a family isn't built by perfect beginnings. It's built by imperfect people who choose one another every single day. As we walked back toward the house together, I slipped the rusty key into my pocket. Not because it still opened the door, but because it would always remind me of the promise that changed my family's life forever. And this time, it was my turn to keep that